I sat quietly in the corner booth of my own restaurant, wearing my old flannel shirt and faded jeans, just watching the Sunday dinner rush. My daughter-in-law, Stephanie, arrived with my son Brian and their 2 children. She walked right past me without a glance. When a waiter offered me complimentary bread, Stephanie stormed over and humiliated me publicly, calling me a creepy old man who didn't belong in such a nice establishment. She screamed for the manager. Marcus approached with a knowing smile and asked me directly, "Sir, how would you like me to handle these guests?" Stephanie's face drained of all color. The silence that followed felt like it stretched for an eternity. Stephanie stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, confusion spreading across her perfectly made-up face like spilled wine on white linen. Her hand, which had been pointing at me accusingly just seconds before, slowly dropped to her side. I remained seated, calm as the eye of a storm, while Marcus stood beside me with that professional smile of his. The other diners had stopped eating, their forks suspended in mid-air, all eyes on our little drama. "I'm sorry," Stephanie stammered, her voice suddenly small. "I don't understand what's happening here." I took a slow sip of my water before speaking. "Marcus, would you mind introducing me to our guests? I don't believe we've been properly acquainted this evening." Marcus nodded, his smile widening just a fraction. "Of course, sir. Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the nearby tables, his voice carrying across the hushed dining room. "Allow me to introduce Xavier Montgomery, founder and owner of Montgomery's Fine Dining, established 30 years ago. This restaurant, along with the 11 others in our chain across the state, the color that had drained from Stephanie's face moments ago now rushed back in a deep crimson flush. Brian, my son, stood behind her looking like someone had just told him the sky was actually green. The children, my grandchildren Emma and Jackson, whom I hadn't been allowed to see in over 8 months, stared at me with wide, confused eyes. "Dad?" Brian's voice cracked slightly. "What are you doing here?" "I eat here every Sunday," I said simply. "Have been for the past 6 months. You've walked past me 4 times, Stephanie. 4 separate Sundays when you brought Brian and the kids here for your weekly family dinner." Stephanie's laugh came out high and forced, like breaking glass. "Well, the lighting in here is so dim, and you know I have terrible eyesight. I've been meaning to get new glasses." She turned to Brian, touching his arm. "Honey, I had no idea this was your father. If I'd known, I would have said hello, of course." Brian looked between us, uncertainty flickering across his face. "But Mom, you told us Grandpa was too poor to come to nice restaurants. You said he was living in that tiny apartment and we had to help him with groceries." "I do live in a small apartment," I confirmed, watching Stephanie carefully. 2 bedrooms, about 900 square feet, on the east side of town. I've lived there for 5 years now, since your grandmother passed away. The house we raised you in felt too empty, Brian." "See?" Stephanie jumped on this, relief flooding her features. "Your father prefers a simpler lifestyle. There's nothing wrong with that. I just didn't recognize him out of context, that's all." I nodded slowly, as if considering her explanation. "Marcus, would you please show my family to our best table? The one by the window, overlooking the garden." "Certainly, sir." Marcus gestured toward the prime spot in the restaurant, a corner table that usually required reservations weeks in advance. As they moved toward the table, Stephanie walking with renewed confidence, clearly believing she'd escaped the situation, I added casually, "Oh, and Brian, you might be interested to know that I've been working on a memoir project. Recording family gatherings, special moments, that sort of thing. Been doing it for about 6 months now. Quite a collection of footage I've gathered." Stephanie stopped mid-step, her designer heel catching slightly on the carpet. When she turned back to look at me, that awful paleness had returned to her face, and this time it didn't fade. The dinner that followed was perhaps the most uncomfortable meal I'd ever witnessed in my own restaurant. Stephanie picked at her salmon without taking a single bite. Brian kept glancing between his wife and me, trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't yet realize existed. Little Emma, who was 7, asked why everyone was so quiet. Jackson, barely 5, just wanted to know if he could order dessert. I joined them at the table, pulling up a chair that Marcus had quietly provided. The warm bread basket sat untouched between us, cooling in the awkward silence. "So, Dad," Brian finally said, clearing his throat, "how long have you owned this place? I mean, I knew you worked in restaurants, but I thought you were retired." 32 years this October, I replied, buttering a slice of bread with deliberate care. Started with a small diner downtown, saved every penny, and bought this location when the previous owner wanted to retire. Built it from the ground up. The other locations came later, over the years. Stephanie's fork clinked against her plate, too loud in the quiet conversation. That's wonderful, Xavier. Really impressive. I'm sorry I didn't know. Brian must have forgotten to mention it. Actually, Brian said slowly, I didn't know either. Dad, you never told me you owned restaurants. You always just said you worked in food service. You never asked for details, I said gently. There was no accusation in my voice, just fact. And I suppose I liked it that way. Kept things simple. I didn't want people treating me differently because of money. That's very humble of you, Stephanie said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. But surely you got our Christmas cards. Brian always mentions what he's up to, and I know I've written about how well his job at the accounting firm is going. Funny thing about those Christmas cards, I said, taking a sip of wine. I haven't received one in 8 months. In fact, I haven't received much mail at all lately. Not even my bank statements. The table went very still. Even the children seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, stopping their fidgeting. That's strange, Stephanie said quickly. The post office has been terrible lately. We've had problems with our mail too, haven't we, Brian? Brian frowned. No, our mail has been fine. Well, someone's mail is getting mixed up somewhere, Stephanie insisted, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and smiled again. These things happen. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a document my assistant had prepared. Actually, I had my team look into it. Turns out someone changed my mailing address 8 months ago. Had all my mail forwarded to a different location. I looked up, meeting Stephanie's eyes. To your house, specifically. Brian's head snapped toward his wife. What? Stephanie, is that true? I can explain, she said, her hands fluttering nervously. Your father was having trouble keeping track of things, Brian. You remember how worried we were about his memory? I was just trying to help, making sure nothing important got lost. My memory is fine, I said calmly. Though you did try hard to convince Brian otherwise, didn't you? All those stories about me forgetting appointments, getting confused about dates. Dad, is this true? Brian's voice carried a note of distress. Stephanie said you'd been declining. She was the one who suggested we get you help, that maybe you needed someone to manage your finances. Manage my finances, I repeated. Is that what she told you? Brian, did you know that someone opened a bank account in my name 8 months ago? The same time my mail started being redirected? Stephanie stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I think we should discuss this privately, not in a restaurant full of people. Sit down, Stephanie, Brian said quietly, but there was steel in his voice I'd never heard before. I want to hear this. She remained, standing for a moment, then slowly lowered herself back into her chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I continued, keeping my voice level and calm. The account has been receiving my Social Security benefits, my pension payments, dividends from investments. Over $43,000 in 8 months. Brian's face went pale. Stephanie, please tell me this isn't true. I was protecting it, she said, and now there were tears in her eyes. I was saving it for him, for when he needed care. You know how expensive nursing homes are, Brian. I was being responsible, thinking ahead. That's interesting, I said, because my lawyer just showed me where that money actually went. Would you like me to tell Brian, or would you prefer to do it yourself? The tears stopped as suddenly as they'd started. Stephanie's face hardened, all pretense of distress vanishing. You had no right to investigate me. I had every right to investigate where my money was going, I replied. The vacation home purchased in your sister's name in Colorado, $45,000. The luxury car, a new Mercedes, registered to your mother, $52,000. Should I go on? Brian pushed back from the table, standing now, his hands shaking. Stephanie, tell me he's lying. Tell me you didn't steal from my father. It wasn't stealing, she snapped, her voice losing its sweet tone entirely. It was strategic financial planning. Your father has more money than he could ever spend. We have expenses, Brian. The kids need things. I need things. Your salary barely covers the mortgage. My salary barely covers the mortgage on the house you insisted we buy, Brian shot back. The house that was twice what I said we could afford. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folder, setting it on the table. Brian, there's something else you need to see. My lawyer will be here in about 5 minutes, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. Stephanie's eyes fixed on the folder like it was a snake about to strike. Don't, she whispered. I opened it, showing Brian the top document. These are emails between your wife and a lawyer who specializes in conservatorships. She's been trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen sound seemed muted. Brian took the folder with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the printed emails. I watched his face as he read, saw the moment he got to the worst part. She wrote, his voice barely above a whisper. The old fool won't last long in a home anyway. Brian, I can explain, Stephanie started, but Brian held up his hand. You were going to have my father locked away so you could take his money. My father, who I thought was struggling, who I felt guilty about not helping more. He looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have questioned it. You trusted your wife, I said gently. That's not something to apologize for. Stephanie stood again, this time grabbing her purse. I don't have to listen to this. This is harassment. You're a bitter old man who never liked me, who couldn't stand to see me happy with your son. Come on, Brian. We're leaving. No, Brian said firmly. You're leaving. The kids and I are staying. You can't be serious, she said, her voice rising. I'm your wife. We have a family. You're going to believe him over me? I'm looking at evidence, Stephanie. Emails you wrote. Bank records with your signature. This isn't about believing anyone. This is about facts. She looked around wildly, as if searching for support, for someone to take her side. The other diners looked away, uncomfortable witnesses to a family falling apart. Then her eyes landed on Emma, and she grabbed the little girl's hand. Fine, if you're staying with your father, I'm taking the children. They're mine too. That's when Marcus reappeared, and he wasn't alone. A woman in a business suit stood beside him, along with a police officer and a man in a detective's blazer. Mrs. Montgomery, the detective said, stepping forward. I'm Detective Harrison with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you. Stephanie's grip on Emma's hand tightened. I don't have to talk to you without a lawyer. That's absolutely your right, Detective Harrison said calmly. But we're not here to arrest you. We're here to serve you with some documents. He held out a folder. This is a restraining order. You're to have no contact with Xavier Montgomery or any of his financial accounts. We're also here to inform you that all accounts connected to the funds taken from Mr. Montgomery have been frozen pending investigation. The woman in the business suit stepped forward. I'm Patricia Walsh, Mr. Montgomery's attorney. I'm also filing for an emergency injunction to prevent any further transfer of assets. Stephanie released Emma's hand, taking the papers with shaking fingers. This is insane. You can't do this. Brian, tell them this is crazy. But Brian had moved to his children, kneeling down to their level, wrapping his arms around them both. They clung to him, Emma crying softly, Jackson looking scared and confused. Detective Harrison continued, his voice professional but not unkind. Mrs. Montgomery, we've been investigating you for 3 weeks now. Mr. Montgomery came to us with his concerns. And what we found was troubling. 3 weeks? Stephanie's head whipped toward me. You've been investigating me for 3 weeks and said nothing? I needed to know the truth, I said simply. And I needed to protect my son and grandchildren from whatever that truth turned out to be. We also need to inform you, the detective said, pulling out another document, that we've been in contact with authorities in Arizona. There's an outstanding warrant for your arrest there. The color drained from Stephanie's face completely. Brian stood up slowly, looking at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Arizona? We've never been to Arizona. She has, Detective Harrison said. Under the name Stephanie Morgan, that is your legal name, isn't it, Mrs. Montgomery? Or should I say, Miss Morgan? The restaurant felt like it had stopped breathing. Every person, every waiter, even the soft background music seemed to have paused, waiting for her response. I changed my name legally, Stephanie said, her voice hard now, defensive. There's nothing illegal about that. No, there isn't, the detective agreed. But there is something illegal about what you did in Arizona 7 years ago. An elderly woman named Dorothy Patterson. Ring any bells? Stephanie said nothing, her jaw clenched tight. Detective Harrison continued, reading from his notes. Dorothy Patterson, age 82, widow, living alone in Scottsdale. You befriended her, gained her trust, convinced her to sign over power of attorney. Then you systematically drained her accounts and sold her home. Left her in a substandard care facility where she died 6 months later of neglect. That's not what happened, Stephanie said, but her voice lacked conviction. That case was dismissed. The criminal case was dropped due to lack of evidence and Dorothy's death, Detective Harrison said. But the civil case from her family is still active. And now, with this new evidence of a pattern of behavior, the district attorney in Maricopa County is very interested in reopening the investigation. Brian had gone completely white. He looked at me, then at Stephanie, then back at me. Dad, is this real? Is this actually happening? I'm afraid so, son, I said quietly. I hired a private investigator when things started feeling wrong, when you stopped visiting, when Stephanie always had reasons why the kids couldn't see me. The investigator found the name change, then the Arizona case, and everything started making sense. You're lying, Stephanie said, but there was desperation in her voice now. Xavier is making this up because he never wanted us together. Brian, remember when we first met? Your father barely spoke to me at dinner. He was cold, distant. He's been trying to break us up from the beginning. I was cautious, I admitted. You appeared in Brian's life very suddenly. You were so eager to get married quickly. And yes, I did some checking into your background then, but I found nothing. The name change happened right before you met Brian. You covered your tracks well. Patricia Walsh opened her briefcase, pulling out more documents. We've also discovered that Stephanie has done this before, at least 2 other times that we can verify. An elderly man in New Mexico, a widow in Texas. Always the same pattern. Befriend someone vulnerable, gain access to their finances, disappear with the money. But Brian isn't elderly, I said, looking at my son, seeing the pain in his eyes. So why him? Because of you, Detective Harrison said. Our investigation suggests that Stephanie researched families with wealth. She found out about your restaurant chain, your assets. Brian was the target, the way in. Marry him, have children, create ties that couldn't easily be broken. Then slowly isolate him from you, make him think you were failing mentally, and position herself to inherit everything when the time came. Or speed up the process, Patricia added, by having Xavier declared incompetent and institutionalized. Brian sat down heavily, as if his legs couldn't hold him anymore. 5 years, he said softly. We've been married 5 years, Emma and Jackson, our home. Everything was a lie? Stephanie's mask finally cracked completely. The tears, the pleading expression, all of it vanished, replaced by cold calculation. You were so easy, Brian. So desperate for someone to love you after that girlfriend left you. So eager to believe that someone like me could actually be interested in someone like you. The cruelty in her voice made Brian flinch, as if she'd struck him physically. Your father was the hard part, she continued, her voice bitter. The old man who insisted on living in that tiny apartment, driving that old truck, wearing clothes from thrift stores. I thought he was actually poor. That all this, she gestured around the restaurant, was some story he'd made up. By the time I figured out the truth, I was already committed to the plan. So, you decided to steal from him anyway, Detective Harrison said. I decided to take what should have been Brian's eventually anyway, she snapped. What's the difference if I get it now, or 20 years from now when the old man finally dies? Emma started crying harder. Jackson had his face buried in Brian's shirt. Stephanie didn't even glance at them. The difference, I said quietly, is that those 20 years are my life. Time with my son, with my grandchildren, watching them grow up. That's time you wanted to steal from all of us. Stephanie laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Spare me the sentimental speech. You're just angry because I was smarter than you thought. I almost had it all. Almost, Detective Harrison agreed. Miss Morgan, you're not under arrest right now, but you need to know that charges are pending. Federal charges for elder abuse and fraud, the Arizona warrant. You should probably call a lawyer. I don't need a lawyer, Stephanie said. I haven't done anything wrong that I can't explain. Then explain the plane tickets, Detective Harrison said, pulling out his phone and showing her something on the screen. The tickets to Mexico City purchased 3 days ago under the name Jennifer Morrison. That's your mother's maiden name, isn't it? Stephanie's eyes widened. Explain the $40,000 withdrawn in cash from various ATMs over the past week. Explain the passport applications for your children under false names. Brian stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You are going to take my children and run? They're my children too, Stephanie shot back. They're minors who you were planning to kidnap, Patricia Walsh said firmly. Mr. Montgomery, I strongly advise you to file for emergency custody immediately. You can't do that, Stephanie said, but there was panic in her voice now. Brian, you can't take my children away from me. Whatever else I've done, I'm still their mother. A mother who was planning to kidnap them and flee the country, Brian said, his voice shaking with rage. A mother who married me as part of a con game, who stole from my father. Who was going to lock him away in a home to die? I love those kids, Stephanie insisted. Everything I did was for them, to give them a better life. You were going to steal their grandfather from them, Brian said. You were going to steal their father from them by taking them to another country. That's not love, Stephanie. That's not even close to love. Detective Harrison put his phone away. Miss Morgan, we need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. Again, you have the right to an attorney. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but we need a formal statement. Stephanie looked around the restaurant, at all the people watching, at her husband who could barely look at her, at her children who were clinging to their father in fear. Then she looked at me, and the hatred in her eyes was pure and undiluted. This isn't over, she said. You think you've won, old man, but I know things. I know secrets about this family. I can make your life hell. You've already tried, I said calmly, and it didn't work. She grabbed her purse, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the door with Detective Harrison following. Just before she left, she turned back one more time. Brian, she called out, when you realize what you're giving up, when you see what this does to the kids, remember that you chose him over me. You chose your father over your family. No, Brian said, his arm around his children. I chose the truth over lies. There's a difference. The door closed behind her, and the restaurant slowly came back to life. Conversations resuming in hushed tones, the kitchen sounds returning to normal. But at our table, everything had changed forever. The week that followed felt like living in the eye of a hurricane. Stephanie didn't go quietly. She hired a lawyer, an aggressive attorney named Garrett Phillips, who specialized in what he called family defense, but what everyone else knew was reputation management and media manipulation. I was in my office at the restaurant's main location when I saw the first news report. My assistant, Caroline, knocked on the door and entered with her tablet, her face pale. Xavier, you need to see this. She set the tablet on my desk. There was Stephanie, looking small and vulnerable, sitting across from a local news anchor. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup minimal. She looked nothing like the cold, calculating woman who had stood in my restaurant days before. I'm speaking out today because I have to protect my children, she was saying, her voice breaking slightly. My father-in-law is a very powerful man. He owns a chain of successful restaurants. He has money, connections, influence, and he's using all of that to destroy me because I dared to stand up to him. The anchor leaned forward sympathetically. Stand up to him how? My husband Brian and I have been married for 5 years. We have 2 beautiful children together. But from the beginning, Xavier never approved of me. I wasn't from the right family, didn't have the right connections. He wanted his son to marry someone from their social circle. That's not true, I muttered, but Caroline shushed me. It gets worse, she said. Stephanie continued, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When I tried to help Xavier manage his finances, he became paranoid. He accused me of stealing, of plotting against him. He's turned my own husband against me. I haven't seen my children in 4 days. And there are criminal charges pending? The anchor asked. Charges that Xavier manufactured, Stephanie said firmly. He has investigators, lawyers, people who will say whatever he pays them to say. I'm just a woman trying to protect her family from a controlling, manipulative man who can't stand that his son has a life separate from him. The interview went on for another 5 minutes. By the time it ended, my phone was already ringing. Caroline handed it to me. It was Brian. Dad, are you watching this? I just saw it. She's lying. Everything she's saying is a complete lie. I know that, son. The question is, how many other people know that? Over the next few days, I learned the answer. Not enough people. Stephanie's lawyer was brilliant at his job. He released carefully edited recordings of conversations, taking words out of context to make me sound cold and calculating. He held press conferences, always with Stephanie looking fragile beside him, painting a picture of a vulnerable woman being crushed by a wealthy, powerful patriarch. Social media exploded. Half the comments were supportive of Stephanie, calling her brave for speaking out. The other half defended me, but those voices seemed quieter, less certain. The hashtag #StandWithStephanie started trending locally. Then the reviews started. My restaurants, all of them, were suddenly flooded with one-star ratings on every platform. The comments were brutal. Owner is an abusive father-in-law. Supports elder abuse. Used his power to destroy his son's marriage. None of them had actually eaten at the restaurants. They were just people who had seen Stephanie's interview and decided I was the villain in her story. My business partners called an emergency meeting. We sat in the conference room of the flagship restaurant, 5 of us around the table, and I could see the concern on their faces. Thomas, who had been with me since the second restaurant opened, spoke first. "Xavier, we need to talk about the publicity. Reservations are down 30% this week. We've had 3 corporate events cancel." "I understand," I said. "But paying her off would only make it worse. She'd take the money and still tell her story." "I'm not suggesting we pay her off," Thomas said carefully. "I'm suggesting we settle the civil suit she's filed. Give her something, enough to make her go away, and we can all move on." "She's suing for $7 million, I said, "for defamation and emotional distress. So we offer her $2 million, another partner, Jennifer, suggested. "Frame it as a divorce settlement, not an admission of wrongdoing. It's cheaper than a prolonged legal battle, and it ends the media circus." I looked around the table. "Is that what everyone thinks?" They exchanged glances. Finally, Thomas said, "Xavier, you built this company. We all respect that. But we have to think about the business, about our employees. If this continues, we might not have restaurants left to protect." I left that meeting feeling older than I had in years. Caroline drove me home to my small apartment, and I sat in my worn recliner, looking at the photos on the wall, Brian as a child. His mother, my wife Helen, smiling in our backyard. The restaurant on opening day, so small and full of hope. My phone rang. It was Brian. "Dad, I just heard from my lawyer. Stephanie filed for emergency custody today. She's claiming I'm an unfit father because I'm letting you manipulate me." "What?" "She has fake police reports, Dad. Reports claiming I was abusive to her and the kids. Medical records that are completely fabricated. Her lawyer is good. He's creating an entire false history." "Can your lawyer fight it?" "He's trying. But the family court judge granted her supervised visitation starting tomorrow. She gets to see Emma and Jackson for 2 hours, with a court-appointed supervisor." "Brian, I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I just kept quiet, paid her off from the beginning." "No," Brian said firmly. "Don't you dare apologize. She's the criminal here, not you. We just need to be smarter than her, that's all." But being smart wasn't enough. The next day, Stephanie showed up for her supervised visit with the children. She brought toys, their favorite foods, and spent the entire 2 hours being the perfect mother. The supervisor's report was glowing. Then she gave another interview, this one to a larger news outlet. She brought Emma and Jackson on camera, though their faces were blurred for privacy. She talked about how much she missed them, how she was fighting to protect them from a toxic family environment. The public ate it up. The story went viral. Suddenly, I wasn't just dealing with local backlash. National news picked it up. Articles appeared. Wealthy restaurant owner, accused of tearing family apart. David versus Goliath. One woman's fight against a powerful family. My restaurants were now getting targeted by organized protests. People I'd never met stood outside with signs, "Justice for Stephanie, Stop Elder Abuse of Power." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the actual victim of elder abuse. But somehow Stephanie had flipped the narrative completely. I couldn't sleep. My blood pressure was up. My doctor told me I needed to reduce stress, but how could I when everything I'd built was crumbling around me? Then Brian came to my apartment one evening, looking exhausted but determined. "Dad, I need to show you something." He opened his laptop, pulling up a file. "I've been doing my own investigating. I went through Stephanie's things at the house, stuff she left behind in her rush to appear like the victim." "What did you find?" "This." He turned the screen toward me. It was a diary. Not a journal of thoughts and feelings, but a detailed log, a strategic plan. Page after page of notes about me, about Brian, about our family, research into our finances, analysis of Brian's personality, his weaknesses, how to manipulate him. She specifically targeted me, Brian said, his voice hollow. Look at this entry, from 6 months before we even met. Brian Montgomery, 32, single, recent breakup, working at Preston and Associates, father owns restaurant chain, estimated net worth $12 million. She researched multiple families, Dad. She had a list. She chose me because I was vulnerable. I read through the entries, feeling sick. They were clinical, emotionless, like a predator studying prey. There's more, Brian said, scrolling to later entries. After we got married, after Emma was born. Listen to this. Brian is completely dependent on me now. He believes he can't live without me. Xavier remains the obstacle. Need to accelerate timeline. Consider options for accidents, but too risky. Better to use legal system. Conservatorship is cleaner. She was planning this from the start, I said. Not just planning. Look at the last entry, from 2 weeks ago. Brian's hands were shaking as he scrolled to the final page. If the old man has me investigated, need contingency plan. Public sympathy is easy to manipulate. Americans love an underdog story. Position myself as victim, use media, bleed him dry through legal fees and reputation damage. Either way, I win. Either I get control of the money quietly, or I destroy him publicly and take it in settlement. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her calculated cruelty settling over us. We have to show this to your lawyer, I said finally. This proves everything. I'm taking it to him tomorrow, Brian said. But Dad, there's something else you need to know. Stephanie knows I have this. She called me today, from a number I didn't recognize. She said if I try to use the diary against her, she'll claim I fabricated it. She'll say you paid someone to create it to frame her. Will people believe that? After everything she's already gotten them to believe? I don't know. Brian closed the laptop, rubbing his eyes. She's threatening to take this further, to accuse you of attempting to bribe officials, of witness tampering. Her lawyer is already drafting the complaints. True or not, the accusations alone will destroy your reputation. Then we're trapped, I said quietly. If we fight, she makes more accusations. If we settle, she wins. And either way, she's torn our family apart. Brian stood up, walking to the window of my small apartment, looking out at the city lights. There has to be a way to stop her. There has to be some line she won't cross, some mistake she'll make. People like Stephanie don't make mistakes, I said. They make plans, and her plan is working. But we were wrong about that. Stephanie did make a mistake. A big one. We just didn't know it yet. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, but Stephanie wasn't waiting for the legal system to work in her favor. She continued her media campaign, appearing on podcasts, giving newspaper interviews, building her image as the wronged woman fighting against impossible odds. Her lawyer, Garrett Phillips, was a master of public manipulation. He'd take a simple legal filing and turn it into a press conference. Every court appearance became an opportunity for Stephanie to look tearful and brave in front of cameras. My legal team tried to counter the narrative, but facts don't go viral the way emotional stories do. We released bank records showing the theft. They said I'd fabricated them. We presented the emails about having me declared incompetent. They claimed I'd hacked Stephanie's computer and planted them. Meanwhile, the pressure on my business was becoming unsustainable. 3 of my smaller restaurants were operating at a loss. Staff members were quitting, unable to handle the protesters outside or the hostile customers who came in just to harass them. Thomas called another partners meeting. This time, the mood was grimmer. Xavier, we can't continue like this, Jennifer said. We're losing $100,000 a week across all locations. If it doesn't stop soon, we'll have to start closing restaurants. What are you suggesting? Settle with her, Thomas said bluntly. Whatever she wants. $7 million, $10 million, I don't care. Pay it and make this nightmare end. If I do that, she wins. She gets away with everything she's done. And if you don't, we all lose everything, Jennifer countered. Not just you, Xavier, all of us. Our employees, their families. 300 people work for this company. Are you willing to sacrifice all of them for pride? She was right, and I knew it. But the thought of Stephanie walking away with millions unpunished possibly free to do this to another family, made me feel physically ill. I was saved from having to answer by my phone ringing. It was Patricia Walsh, my attorney. "Xavier, you need to come to my office right now. We've had a development." "What kind of development?" "The kind I can't discuss over the phone. Bring Brian if you can reach him." An hour later, Brian and I sat in Patricia's conference room. She had Detective Harrison with her, and both of them looked grimly satisfied. "We've been conducting our own investigation," Patricia began, parallel to what the police have been doing. "We hired a forensic accountant to trace every dollar that moved through accounts connected to Stephanie." She spread papers across the table. "What we found was interesting. The money she took from you, Xavier, didn't stay in those accounts connected to her sister and mother. It moved through a series of shell companies, offshore accounts, eventually ending up in the Cayman Islands." "So she's been hiding money offshore," I said. "That's illegal, but how does it help us?" "Because she's done it before," Detective Harrison said. "The forensic trail matches patterns from the Arizona case and 2 others we've identified. Same shell companies, same banks, same routing. Stephanie, or whatever her real name is, has been running this con for at least 12 years. 12 years? Brian's voice was hollow. "We've identified 5 other cases with similar patterns. Elderly victims, isolation, financial manipulation, offshore accounts. In total, she's stolen approximately $4 million that we can trace." Patricia pulled up a photo on her laptop. "We also found connections to a man named David Russo. He runs what appears to be a coaching service for romance scams and financial fraud. Teaches people how to target wealthy families, how to build false identities, how to manipulate the legal system." "So Stephanie is part of a larger organization?" I asked. "More like a network," Detective Harrison said. "We're working with the FBI now. This is bigger than just your case." "That's all very interesting," I said carefully. "But Stephanie is still out there giving interviews, destroying my business, and fighting for custody of my grandchildren. How does knowing about this network help us?" Patricia smiled. "Because Stephanie doesn't know we know. She thinks she's still in control of the narrative. And people who think they're winning sometimes get overconfident." "What does that mean?" "It means we're going to give her enough rope to hang herself," Detective Harrison said. "We've set up surveillance, monitoring her communications. We're watching her accounts. And we're waiting for her to make a mistake." "She hasn't made a mistake yet," Brian pointed out. "Everything she's done has been calculated and successful." "Everyone makes mistakes eventually," Patricia said. "Especially when they're under pressure and think they're untouchable." But 2 weeks passed, and Stephanie didn't make any obvious errors. She continued her media campaign. The custody battle intensified. My business continued to suffer. Then, finally, the break we needed came from an unexpected source. Stephanie's supervised visits with Emma and Jackson had been going well, according to the court reports. Too well, actually. The supervisor noted that the children seemed coached in what they said, that their affections seemed performative. But it was during the 5th visit that something happened. Emma, who was 7 and smart beyond her years, said something to the supervisor when Stephanie briefly left the room. "Miss Caroline," Emma said to the supervisor, who happened to share a name with my assistant, "are you here to help Mommy practice?" "Practice what, sweetie?" "Practice being nice. Like she practices at home. She says she has to practice looking sad and being nice so the judge gives her money from Grandpa." The supervisor's report of this conversation was immediately flagged by the judge. Stephanie's lawyer called it a child's misunderstanding, but it was enough to make the judge suspicious. Then, 3 days later, Stephanie gave an interview to a national morning show. It was her biggest platform yet, reaching millions of viewers. She told her story again, the poor woman fighting the powerful family, and America's heart went out to her. What Stephanie didn't know was that the FBI had gotten a warrant to monitor her phone and computer. After the interview aired, she made a call. A call to David Russo, her mentor in fraud. The FBI recording captured everything. Stephanie, high on her successful interview, bragging about how easy it was to manipulate public opinion. How she'd built her entire case on lies, and America was eating it up. How much money she was going to get from me when I finally broke and settled. "The old man is almost done," she said, laughing. "Another week, maybe 2, and he'll pay whatever I ask just to make it stop. His business partners are ready to throw him out. His son is having a breakdown. Everything is going exactly according to plan." Russo congratulated her, discussed his cut of the settlement, and mentioned 3 other students who were running similar cons in different states. The FBI arrested them both the next morning. When the news broke, it was even bigger than Stephanie's victim story had been. The recordings were released to the public. America heard her laughing about manipulating them, heard her admit to everything she'd denied. The backlash was immediate and brutal. The same people who had defended her now turned on her with equal passion. The hashtag changed from Stand with Stephanie to Stephanie I Say Fraud. Every interview she'd given was re-examined. Every tear was now seen as calculated. Every sympathetic word was revealed as manipulation. My restaurants went from being boycotted to having lines out the door, people wanting to support the business that had been wronged. Reservations flooded in. The protesters disappeared, replaced by supporters holding signs apologizing for believing Stephanie's lies. Patricia called me with updates throughout the day. The prosecutor is adding federal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Stephanie is looking at 20 years minimum if convicted. Garrett Phillips dropped her as a client the moment the recordings came out. What about Brian's custody case? The judge issued an emergency order. Stephanie's visitation is suspended indefinitely. Brian has full temporary custody pending the criminal trial. The judge apologized for not seeing through her manipulation sooner. I should have felt relieved, victorious, but mostly I just felt tired. Brian came to my apartment that evening. We sat together in silence for a while. 2 men who had been through a war neither of us wanted to fight. "Is it really over?" he finally asked. "The legal part, mostly," I said. "Stephanie will go to prison. The custody battle is resolved. The business will recover. But the damage she did, to us, to our family, that takes longer to heal." Brian nodded, understanding. "Emma asked me yesterday if Mommy was coming home. I didn't know what to tell her." "Tell her the truth," I said. "In words she can understand. That her mother made bad choices and has to face consequences. That we love her and Jackson and will always be here for them." "I keep thinking about how stupid I was," Brian said. 5 years, Dad. 5 years I was married to her, and I never saw it, never questioned it." "She was a professional," I said gently. "This is what she did. You can't blame yourself for being human, for wanting love and family." "I blame myself for almost losing you," Brian said, his voice breaking. "For letting her convince me you were the problem. For staying away, for keeping the kids from you. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have questioned more, should have stayed close to you even when it was hard. Instead, I chose the easy path, believed the comfortable lies." I reached over and gripped his shoulder. "We both made mistakes. But we're here now together. That's what matters." But even as I said it, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Because Stephanie, cornered and desperate, wasn't done fighting. And a cornered predator is always the most dangerous. Stephanie's bail was set at $500,000. Her family, what little she had or claimed to have, refused to help. Her attorney had abandoned her. She sat in county jail, waiting for trial, and I thought perhaps that was the end. I was wrong. On the 3rd day of her incarceration, Stephanie was released. Someone had posted bail. Patricia found out it was David Russo's lawyer, using funds from accounts we hadn't yet discovered. The FBI was furious, but legally, there was nothing they could do. Stephanie was out, but under strict conditions. She couldn't leave the state, had to wear an ankle monitor, and was forbidden from contacting Brian, the children, or me. She followed those rules for exactly 2 days. On the 3rd day, Brian's home was broken into. Nothing was taken, but the house had been searched, drawers left open, papers scattered. The police investigated but found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing useful. Brian called me, his voice shaking. "She's looking for something. The diary, maybe? Or evidence we might have hidden?" "Change your locks," I said. "Get a security system. I'll have my team install cameras." But cameras couldn't protect against what came next. 2 days after the break-in, Brian received a call from Emma and Jackson's school. Both children had been picked up early by their mother. The school had called Stephanie to verify, and she confirmed she had permission from the court for daytime visits. She didn't have permission. The court order was clear, but by the time we realized what had happened, Stephanie and the children were gone. An Amber Alert went out immediately. Police searched her known addresses. Her phone was off, the ankle monitor cut off and left in a dumpster downtown. Brian was beside himself. He paced my apartment, unable to sit still, his face pale and drawn. "She's going to run. She's going to take them to Mexico or Canada or somewhere we'll never find them." "The FBI is on it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "They've flagged all border crossings, airports, train stations. She can't get far." But hours passed with no news. Then a day. The media, which had been so quick to condemn Stephanie, now treated the kidnapping as the biggest story in the state. Emma and Jackson's photos were everywhere. On the second day, Stephanie called Brian from a burner phone. "I want to make a deal," she said, her voice cold and businesslike. "You and your father drop all charges. Give me $3 million, and I'll return the kids." "You're insane," Brian said, his voice breaking. "This is kidnapping. You're making everything worse." "What's worse is what happens if you don't cooperate," Stephanie said. "I'm desperate, Brian. Desperate people do terrible things. Do you really want to risk your children's safety?" The call ended before it could be traced. Patricia immediately contacted the FBI. "She's trying to negotiate, which means she doesn't have a solid escape plan yet. She's trapped, trying to buy her way out." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We wait. She'll make contact again. And when she does, we'll be ready." But we weren't ready for what happened next. That evening, Stephanie appeared on social media. Not through her accounts, which had been shut down, but on a new profile. She went live on multiple platforms simultaneously, with Emma and Jackson sitting beside her, looking scared and confused. "I know you're all watching," Stephanie said to the camera, her face haggard, makeup smeared. "You think you know my story, but you don't. Yes, I took money. Yes, I lied. But do you know why? Do you know what Xavier Montgomery really is?" "Turn it off," I said to Caroline, who was showing me the live stream on her tablet, but she shook her head. "We need to see what she's saying." Stephanie continued. "Xavier Montgomery built his fortune by destroying people. He's driven competitors out of business, stolen recipes, used his influence to ruin anyone who stood in his way. I tried to expose him, and he crushed me. He used his money and power to paint me as the villain. It was all lies. But she said it with such conviction, such pain in her voice, that I knew some people would believe her. These children," she gestured to Emma and Jackson, "are being used as pawns by a man who cares more about his reputation than his own grandchildren. So I'm protecting them the only way I can. I'm keeping them safe until Xavier agrees to stop destroying me." The comments on the live stream were mixed. Some people called her a monster for using the children. Others believed her, sympathized with her supposed plight. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Xavier, I know you're watching. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to wire $5 million to an account I'll provide. You're going to publicly admit that you framed me, that everything was a lie, or I'm going to tell everyone the real truth about your wife's death." Brian looked at me sharply. "Dad, what is she talking about?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Your mother died of cancer. There's no secret there." But Stephanie wasn't done. Helen Montgomery didn't die of cancer. She died of an overdose of her pain medication. The question is, was it an accident, or did someone help her along? Someone who stood to inherit everything? Someone who was tired of being a caregiver? The room spun. I sat down heavily, my hands shaking. "That's insane," Brian said. "Mom died in hospice. There were nurses, doctors. It was cancer." "It was cancer," I confirmed, my voice barely above a whisper. "But she was in so much pain at the end. The doctors increased her morphine dosage to keep her comfortable. She slipped away peacefully. There was never any question about it." "Stephanie is trying to create doubt," Patricia said, her face grim. "She's desperate, throwing anything she can against the wall to see what sticks." But the damage was done. Within an hour, conspiracy theories were spreading online. People questioning Helen's death, demanding investigations, calling me a murderer. Then Stephanie made her biggest mistake. Still on the live stream, still thinking she was in control, she said to Emma, "Tell them, sweetheart. Tell them what Grandpa told you about Grandma." Emma, clearly coached but obviously scared, said in a small voice, "Grandpa said Grandma went to sleep and didn't wake up." "And what does that mean?" Stephanie prompted. But Emma, instead of following the script, burst into tears. "I want Daddy. I want to go home. You said we were going to see Daddy." "In a moment, sweetie," Stephanie said, trying to maintain her composure, but the mask was cracking. Jackson, younger and less able to hide his feelings, started crying too. "I want Grandpa. You're scary." "I'm not scary. I'm your mother," Stephanie snapped, her voice losing its calculated calm. "You're being mean," Emma said, surprisingly brave despite her tears. "Daddy said you lied about Grandpa. Daddy said you're sick and you need help." Stephanie's face twisted. She reached forward, and for a moment, I thought she might strike the child. Then she seemed to remember the camera, remember that thousands of people were watching. But the momentary loss of control was captured, recorded, shared instantly across every platform. The live stream ended abruptly, but it was too late. The world had seen Stephanie's mask slip completely, had seen her frighten her own children, had seen that her accusations were nothing but desperate manipulations. More importantly, the FBI had been able to trace the live stream's location. The signal bounced through several proxies, but their technical team was good. 90 minutes later, police surrounded a motel on the outskirts of the city. Stephanie had made one final miscalculation. In her desperation to get her message out, to create leverage, she'd stayed in one place too long. When the officers entered the room, they found Emma and Jackson locked in the bathroom, scared but unharmed. Stephanie was trying to escape through a window. She fought the arrest, screaming about conspiracies and being framed, about how Xavier Montgomery controlled everything and no one would believe the truth. The officers didn't listen. They had seen the live stream too. Stephanie was taken back into custody, this time with no possibility of bail. New charges were added: kidnapping, child endangerment, witness tampering, extortion, making false accusations against a law enforcement investigation. Brian and I met him at the police station, where Emma and Jackson were being checked by paramedics. When the children saw us, they ran into our arms, crying but safe. "I knew you'd find us, Daddy," Emma said. "I knew Grandpa would help." As I held my grandchildren, feeling their small bodies trembling against mine, I realized something. Stephanie's final act of desperation, her attempt to destroy me with lies about Helen's death, had backfired completely. Instead of creating doubt, she'd shown the world exactly who she was. A liar, a manipulator, a woman willing to traumatize her own children to get what she wanted. But even though she was back in custody, even though the children were safe, I knew the scars from this would last a long time. For Brian, for the kids, for all of us. The question was, could we heal from what Stephanie had done? Could we rebuild what she'd broken? 3 months later, I stood in the same courthouse where Stephanie's trial had just concluded. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 23 counts against her. The judge sentenced her to 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 12 years. Additional charges from Arizona and 2 other states were still pending, likely adding more time to her sentence. Stephanie showed no emotion as she was led away in handcuffs. She didn't look at Brian, didn't look at me, just stared straight ahead, her face blank, as if she'd simply shut down. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Brian and I walked past them without comment. We'd said everything we needed to say through our lawyers. Now it was time to focus on healing. The ride back to my apartment was quiet. Brian drove, his hands steady on the wheel in a way they hadn't been for months. "How are you feeling?" I finally asked. He was silent for a moment. Relieved, angry, sad, all of it at once. "Is that normal?" "Completely normal," I said. "You lost someone you thought you knew. You're allowed to grieve that, even if that person never really existed." "The kids asked about her yesterday," Brian said. "Emma wanted to know if Mommy was coming home. I didn't know what to say." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That Mommy made very bad choices and hurt people, so she has to stay away for a long time. That we still love Emma and Jackson, that none of this was their fault." Emma asked if Mommy ever really loved us. "What did you say?" I said I didn't know. That maybe Stephanie loved us in the only way she knew how, but it wasn't a healthy kind of love. Was that the right answer? "There is no right answer," I said gently. "You did the best you could." We pulled up to my apartment building, but neither of us moved to get out. "Dad," Brian said finally, "I owe you an apology, a real one." "You've already apologized." "Not for the right things. I'm sorry for being so distant before all this, for not questioning Stephanie when she kept us apart, for choosing the easy path instead of the right one." Brian, you were manipulated by a professional con artist. You can't blame yourself for that. I can blame myself for not trusting my own instincts, for ignoring the small warning signs because I wanted so badly to have a perfect family. I saw things that didn't add up, Dad. Little things. But I pushed them aside because facing them would have meant admitting I'd made a mistake. I turned to look at my son, seeing the pain and guilt in his eyes. We all make mistakes. The question is what we do afterward. You chose the truth when it mattered most. You protected your children. You stood by me even when it was hard. That's what counts. I just keep thinking about all the time we lost. The years when Emma and Jackson barely knew you because I let Stephanie keep us apart. Then we make up for lost time, I said simply. Starting now, over the next several weeks, that's exactly what we did. Brian and the children moved into a smaller house, closer to my apartment. Every Sunday we had dinner together. Not at the restaurant, but at home, cooking meals together, letting Emma and Jackson help with simple tasks. I taught Emma how to make my wife's famous chocolate chip cookies, the same recipe Helen had taught Brian when he was young. Jackson helped me plant a small vegetable garden in Brian's backyard, learning about tomatoes and peppers and patience. Slowly, the children's nightmares became less frequent. Their smiles came easier. They started talking about the future again instead of being trapped in fear of the present. Brian started therapy, working through the trauma of realizing his marriage had been built on lies. He went through stages: anger, denial, grief, acceptance. It wasn't a straight line, but it was progress. I started therapy too. Not because anyone forced me, but because I realized I had my own work to do. I'd spent so many years after Helen's death focusing on business, keeping myself distant, testing people instead of trusting them. Stephanie had exploited that distance, but I had created it. Why do you think you pulled away from Brian after your wife died? My therapist, Dr. Sarah Porter, asked during one session. I thought about it for a long time before answering. Because loving people means risking loss. Helen's death nearly destroyed me. I think part of me decided it was safer to keep everyone at arm's length, to be generous with money but stingy with emotion. And what did that cost you? Nearly everything that actually mattered. That realization changed something in me. I started being more present, not just with Brian and the children, but with everyone in my life. I had real conversations with my restaurant staff, learned about their lives, their families. I reconnected with old friends I'd let drift away. I also started the Foundation for Elder Safety and Advocacy, using my experience with Stephanie to help others recognize and prevent financial exploitation. We offered free legal consultations, educational programs, support groups for victims and their families. The first time I spoke at one of our support group meetings, sharing my story with a room full of strangers who'd been through similar experiences, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: purpose beyond just building wealth. An elderly woman named Dorothy approached me after the meeting. "Thank you for sharing," she said. "My daughter did something similar to me. Took my savings, tried to have me declared incompetent. I've been so ashamed, thinking I was stupid for trusting her." "You weren't stupid," I told her firmly. "You loved your daughter. These people exploit our love, our trust. That's on them, not us." "Do you still love your daughter-in-law?" she asked. "After everything she did?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. No, I don't think I ever actually knew her well enough to love her. I loved the idea of her, the woman I thought she was. But that person never existed. What I do love are my son and grandchildren, and I love them enough to help them heal from what she did. 6 months after the trial, Brian started dating again. Nothing serious, just coffee with a woman from his office who'd been kind during his divorce. He was terrified, convinced he'd be fooled again, unable to trust his own judgment. "How do I know she's real?" he asked me over Sunday dinner, while Emma and Jackson played in the next room. "How do I know I'm not making the same mistake?" "You can't know for certain," I said honestly, "but you're not the same person you were 5 years ago. You know what red flags look like now. You know to trust your instincts, to ask questions, to not rush into anything. What if I never trust anyone again?" That's the other extreme. And it's just as damaging. Stephanie was a professional con artist. Most people aren't like her. Most people are just trying to do their best, same as you. He nodded, but I could see the fear still lingering in his eyes. Healing from betrayal takes time, and there are no shortcuts. As for my business, it recovered, and then some. The publicity, once it turned in our favor, brought in customers who wanted to support a family that had stood up against fraud. My restaurants became known not just for good food, but for integrity. I changed some of my business practices too. I'd always been focused on profit margins and efficiency, but now I prioritized employee well-being, better wages, better benefits, a culture where people felt valued. It cost more in the short term, but the loyalty and quality it generated was worth far more than money. One evening, almost a year after Stephanie's sentencing, I sat in that same corner booth at the restaurant where everything had started. Marcus brought me my usual meal without being asked. "You still come here every Sunday," he observed with a smile. "Some habits are worth keeping," I said. Brian and the children arrived a few minutes later. Emma had lost her first tooth and couldn't stop talking about the tooth fairy. Jackson wanted to show me a drawing he'd made at school of our garden. As we ate dinner together, laughing over Emma's gap-toothed grin and Jackson's elaborate plans for our next planting season, I looked around the restaurant. At the families sharing meals, the couples on dates, the friends celebrating milestones, all these people living their lives, trusting each other enough to sit down together and share food and conversation. Stephanie had tried to teach me that trust was dangerous, that love was a weakness to be exploited. But she was wrong. Trust is what makes us human. Love is what makes life worth living. Yes, sometimes people betray that trust. Sometimes love is used as a weapon. But the alternative, a life lived in isolation and suspicion, isn't really living at all. "Grandpa," Emma said, interrupting my thoughts, "can we make cookies again next week?" "Absolutely," I said, ruffling her hair. "We can make whatever you want. I want to make the chocolate ones, like Grandma used to make." "Then that's what we'll do." As I watched my granddaughter's face light up with joy, as I felt my son's hand briefly squeeze my shoulder in gratitude, as I sat surrounded by the simple, precious gift of family, I realized something profound. Stephanie had taken a lot from us. Money, time, trust, innocence. But she hadn't taken everything. She hadn't broken us. In some ways, her cruelty had actually brought us closer together, forced us to appreciate what we'd taken for granted. The greatest revenge against someone who tried to destroy your family isn't anger or bitterness. It's healing. It's rebuilding. It's refusing to let their poison corrupt your capacity for love and trust. I raised my glass of wine, and Brian raised his, though his was just sparkling water. "To family," I said simply. "To family," Brian echoed. Emma and Jackson clinked their juice glasses against ours, not really understanding the weight of the moment but participating in the ritual anyway. And in that simple toast, in that ordinary moment of connection, we reclaimed everything Stephanie had tried to steal from us. The story of what happened to us became something I shared at the foundation meetings, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a survivor offering hope. I told people that yes, there are predators in the world. Yes, people will exploit kindness and trust. But the answer isn't to stop being kind, to stop trusting. The answer is to be wise in who we trust, to pay attention to warning signs, but never to close our hearts completely, because a closed heart might be protected from pain, but it's also closed to joy, to love, to everything that makes life worth living. Real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or business holdings. It's measured in the people who stand beside you in hard times. It's measured in the memories you create, the love you share, the lives you touch. Stephanie taught me that lesson, though not in the way she intended. She thought she could measure me in dollars, thought she could destroy me by taking my money and reputation. But she never understood that those things weren't where my real value lay. My real value was sitting across from me, finishing his dinner, was coloring a picture at the end of the table, was laughing about loose teeth and tooth fairies. My real value was in being present, being honest, being willing to trust again even after being betrayed. That's the lesson I want to leave with you. Life will bring people into your path who will hurt you, who will exploit your kindness, who will see your love as a weakness to manipulate. But don't let them turn you into someone hard and closed off. Stay open, stay kind, stay willing to trust, but be wise about it. Pay attention to actions, not just words. Notice when something feels wrong. And most importantly, prioritize the people who truly matter, the ones who stand by you not for what you have, but for who you are. As I finish this story, Sitting in my small apartment with photos of my family surrounding me, I want you to think about your own relationships. Are there people you've been taking for granted? Family members you've let drift away? Loved ones you've been keeping at arm's length because you're afraid of being hurt? Life is short. Too short to spend it in isolation. Too short to let fear win. Reach out. Reconnect. Take the risk of loving people, even knowing that love makes you vulnerable. Because in the end, the moments that matter aren't the ones where we protected ourselves perfectly. They're the ones where we opened our hearts, took chances, and let people in. Those are the moments we remember. Those are the moments that define us. Those are the moments that make life worth living. So let me ask you this. Who in your life do you need to reach out to? What relationship have you been neglecting? What fear has been holding you back from connecting with someone who matters? Think about that. And if this story touched you, if it made you feel something, then share it. Leave a comment telling me about someone who matters to you. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of family and forgiveness. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about real people facing real challenges and finding their way through. And most importantly, share this with someone who might need to hear it. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders of what's important. They're lessons learned through pain but shared with hope. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for allowing me to share the hardest experience of my life in the hope that it might help someone else avoid the same pain or heal from similar wounds. Remember, trust wisely, love bravely, and never let anyone convince you that protecting your heart means closing it completely. Be well, be kind, and cherish the people who matter. Life's too precious to spend it any other way.